please welcome the director of the Myron and Marion Kasdan Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life and professor of history, Steve Ross.
Good afternoon, and for many of you, Lashana Tova. Actually, for all of you, Lashana Tova. If you're looking at your watches and you've come to our events before, you know we follow in the tradition of the LA Opera, which is starting time is exactly 5 minutes after the announcement, the announced time. It is my pleasure. I am the Myron and Marion Kasdan Director of the Kasdan Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life. And I'm also a professor of history here at USC. And I want to welcome you all to our 12th annual Dr. Harold I. Lee Lecture. And before starting, these events always require not just organizational, logistical support, but funding. And so I would like to acknowledge the generosity of two groups that have helped to make this evening possible: the USC Athletics Department and our longtime sponsoring partner, the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles. And the Jewish Community Foundation manages over $1 billion in charitable assets and has been helping their donors conduct philanthropy more effectively for over 60 years. It's quite amazing. And the foundation's 1,300 donors have awarded more than $81 million in grants to several thousand nonprofits last year. And those grants support a wide variety of causes, both Jewish and otherwise, and locally, nationally, and in Israel. And as a matter of fact, we're quite proud to report that over the last 15 years or so, the foundation has contributed over $12 million to USC. Thank you, Jewish Community Foundation. We're delighted to welcome several foundation leaders this evening, including former chair and current trustee Lauren Fife and senior vice president Dan Rothblatt. And tonight, we are very proud and delighted to present a panel discussion of the topic, The Chosen People and the Spirit of the Game, Jews, Sports, and Social Justice. And tonight's event is the product of the original research and fresh spin on the topic of Jews and sports in America, a theme that we had explored in volume 12 of our Kasdan Annual Review titled Beyond Stereotypes, American Jews and Sports. That volume is available later on afterwards. We have a table here. Please pick up a copy if you like, or you can order it on Amazon. Unfortunately, our original moderator, Neil Kramer, was taken ill, but we are delighted that standing in for him tonight will be Larry Turkheimer. Larry was an All-American lacrosse player during his college career at the University of North Carolina and part of the team that began developing the sport of lacrosse in Israel. And Larry will introduce each of our panelists in greater depth, but I would like to thank them in advance for taking the time and for some of them coming cross-country to be with us tonight. Lenny Kraselberg, Noah Miller, Alan Rothenberg, Yarit Yellen, and of course, our heroic last-minute substitute, but no substitute at all, Larry Turkheimer. I also want to acknowledge USC trustee Helene Galen's commitment to USC Athletics and to the Jewish Community Foundation. And from the USC Athletics Department, we are delighted to have David Salo, the head coach of the men and women's swimming team. In addition, we want to welcome Sherry Velasco, Dean of Humanities at USC Dornsife College, who you'll be hearing from in a minute or two. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for taking time today to come down to USC and attend what we are confident will be a delightful conversation. We want to encourage you. This is just one of many things we do. We have both a number of lectures, and we do more casual, where you will not see me in a suit. Sunday afternoon events called Kasdan Conversations. If you sign up on our mailing list, you will be sure to be told, and what I can guarantee you is they are fun. These are things you're going to want to go to rather than feel you ought to go to. Turning to tonight's events, we're delighted to hear multiple voices discuss the general topic of Jews and sports in America, and especially the intersection of athletics and social justice historically and in contemporary times. But before we introduce our panel, it is my great pleasure to welcome my colleague, Sherry Velasco, Vice Dean for the Humanities, to the podium.
Good evening and Shana Tova. I'm so pleased to join you tonight on behalf of the USC Dornsife Dean's Office. I'd like to start by thanking my friend and colleague, Steve Ross, for inviting me. Steve is an outstanding scholar and leader who's done some really amazing work at the Kasdan Institute. Professor Ross forgot to mention that he has a new book coming out by the end of October, Hitler in Los Angeles, How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. It's getting amazing press, and most recently in the New Yorker, if you haven't seen that, and I can't wait to read it. Over the years, the Kasdan Institute has woven itself into the fabric of USC Dornsife. It exemplifies the very spirit of our school and our mission to become the model for 21st century College of Arts and Letters. The Institute creates leading research and scholarship. It digs deep into traditions and looks beyond those traditions with a West Coast mindset. It evolves with and adapts to the needs of our wonderfully diverse city. And it consistently finds meaningful ways to engage with the public, just as we are tonight through lectures, partnerships, and outreach programs. I joined Dean Miller in offering our gratitude to the Institute for its commitment to our academic community, as well as the Jewish Community Foundation and USC Athletics for their leadership in putting together the Lee Lecture. On a personal note, as an ex-professional figure skater, this year's theme initially seemed like a series of oxymorons: Jews and sports, and in my case, figure skating and social justice. But then I was reminded of Holland-born Ellen Burke, who won the 1946 and 1947 Dutch Women's Figure Skating Singles Championship. She did this just years after surviving the Westerbork and Theresienstadt concentration camps during World War II. In fact, she lost her parents and grandmother, and she was actually, figure skating saved her life because one of the generals was a fan of skating and knew she skated, and so he saved her. It's her daughter later did here I am going off script, but anyway, her daughter later did a documentary about her life, and it's really, really powerful. Burke changed the face of figure skating through her unique training techniques and groundbreaking choreography. From that point on, many Jewish women have gone on to illustrious skating careers. We discussed this before: Sasha Cohen, Sarah Hughes, Oksana Bayou, the list goes on. I'll admit that the connection between professional sports and social justice was never one that I'd thought much about until I was invited to this program, and recent events has made me think even more about that. It helped me remember that it was my career as a figure skating coach that made my undergraduate and graduate studies possible. It set me on an intellectual and ethical path to think more critically about marginalized communities and the importance of uncovering and telling their stories. Sports are about testing one's physical body. They're about commitment to training and often to a team. They bring out the competitive nature that we're born with, but they are also about our human relationships. Sports bring people together on a level playing field. When played fairly, it doesn't matter what your race, ethnicity, class, gender, or religious background might be. The rules of the game are the same for everyone. I'd like to think it's a metaphor for the kind of society that we yearn to live in. But we are at a moment in time when it seems as if we're moving away from this ideal. We need to find more effective ways to level the playing field for all people. And the arena where this happens must be built on civility, tolerance, and respect. So tonight, I'm eager to hear our panelists and learn more about the connections and the relationships that we discover across religion, sports, and social justice. So thank you and welcome.
I want to follow Sherry with one moment of an anecdote of going off script, in that I ran track at Columbia for 4 years and was co-captain of the team. And I can tell you this, having been at Columbia in the late 60s and early 70s, social justice themes, particularly civil rights and the war in Vietnam, is what we talked about in the interval when we had literally one lap to jog between every 400 meters that we had to run in under 55 seconds and do 6 of them in a row. And let me tell you, social justice was lagging by the end of the last interval training. But I want to thank Sherry Velasco for opening up tonight's comments. And now a word on our format. After Larry Turkheimer introduces our panelists, they're going to spend about an hour discussing various issues amongst themselves. And then we're going to open up the floor to Q&A. And I have one favor, and I asked this in advance, so if I cut you off, please understand why. We want to get as many questions in as possible. So I'm asking you as politely as I can, make them questions rather than discursive essays, so we can get as many people in as possible. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Larry Turkheimer.
So before I get started, Steve, I brought my whistle. So if we have to cut them off, we'll cut them off. Same thing with you guys. If you go too long, you're going to get a toot. Part-time coach, I always have my whistle with me. So I have to tell you a funny story about how I got to this position right now. So Wednesday afternoon, I get a call from Neil Kramer, a very dear friend and former quote-unquote boss. And he was my boss when we both coached together at the Windward School. And he says to me via text, because people don't talk anymore, he says to me via text, I have the flu. Can you help me out on Sunday and be the moderator for an event about Jews in sport? I said, well, Neil, I was planning on going. I wasn't planning on moderating. But, okay, I'm going to say it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. I said, this will be a good mitzvah, a great way to start the new year, and doing a good deed. So I said, okay, you got it. I'll do it. So I said, yes, but get better before Sunday, please. Well, so here I am moderating a panel in front of 100 of my closest personal friends. And if it works, great. And if not, well, most of you I'll never see again anyway. But since this is mostly a Jewish audience, I'll probably hear it from somebody. Somebody who knows somebody is going to tell somebody that this guy was, whoa, horrible. So as long as it doesn't run on SportsCenter tonight, with the rest of the controversy from today, I guess we're okay. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about these four. An Olympic gold medalist, a sports league executive, an ESPN producer, an IDF and an Israeli lacrosse player, an instructor in his finest of Krav Maga. I think that's the way you say it, or am I a little off? Close enough. Close enough, there we go, okay. I tried. And all of that is very impressive. And I guess the most impressive in this situation is that one of these guys went to SC. So fight on. Or two. Alan, yes, no?
Oh, no, University of Michigan, go blue.
There we go, go blue, all right. So another quick story about me and my relationship to Judaism, being a Jewish athlete in sports. In 2014, the World Games for lacrosse were to be held in Denver, Colorado, and 38 countries sent teams. Some good, some not so good. Israel sent a team. And by the way, they were good. They finished 7th. Not bad for the first time Israel had a team in these games. And 4 years prior, there were 5 guys that got together on a phone call, all of us about my age, who had all played together in high school and in college, all Jewish athletes, but we sort of hid who we were because going to certain schools, we didn't really talk about it, we just played. But so now this conversation comes up that we want to have a team in Israel, and a guy by the name of Bill Baroza, who's the head coach of the Israeli team, calls these 5 or 6 guys on the phone and says, we need to raise some money, we need to put a team in Israel, we need to build this program. So it was nothing less than invigorating in my heart to think that these young boys who are now going to go out there with the Israeli flag on and represent Israel in a team, that we were going to be part of the start of this. So it all began then. So now we go to Denver, we finish 7th, but I'll tell you a quick story. So on Saturday night after the Shabbos, the team has a game. We get on the bus and we pull away from the hotel without Yoni Katz, who's on the cover of the book that is out in the lobby. Because he's an Orthodox Jew and he wanted to walk to the field, because if we left early, he was going to feel like, maybe I shouldn't be on the bus, and then he wouldn't be able to play till the second half. So he walked the 3 miles to the field. And in order to get into the field, you had to have your credentials. And he tied the credentials around his waist because he couldn't carry anything, according to him. So he walked up just as the sun was setting, just as Shabbos was over, and he showed the guy his credentials, and he was into the game, and he was on, and he was able to play. What a great moment for that. As we're riding in the bus, I asked the head coach, Bill Baroza, my friend since I was 12, to let me address the team. I told him how proud I was of them and how to be a Jewish kid growing up, that I hid my Judaism at an all-boys Catholic boarding school where I went, and then to North Carolina. So I told the boys right then and there, these 21 to 28-year-old young men, how proud I was of them being a Jewish athlete, and always to think of Israel in their heart when they step on the field. But I told them in the last 3 days of being with them, hearing them say Kiddush and Motzi on Friday night at the JCC in Denver, our host during that time, and then when we walked on the field that night, and how they locked arms and sang Hatikva at the games, that my love and passion for Judaism had a deeper meaning than ever before, and when I was so proud to wear the flag of Israel on my chest as part of that team. So now, on to the reason we're really here, our panelists. And as I said at the onset, and as Steve has said, they come from very different sports domains. Lenny Kraselberg, to my right, a 4-time Olympic gold medalist in swimming and a 2-time Maccabi Games world medalist. Born in Odessa in the former Soviet Union, his accomplishments deserve a theme song. Maybe with the lyrics, immigrants, they do get the job done. Noah Miller, on the other hand, he's an immigrant as well, except he went the other way. From the U.S. to Israel, where he is a member of the Israeli national lacrosse team, an IDF veteran, he also gets the job done in a big way. Irit Yellen has produced a number of ESPN shows examining the role of athletes in American social justice campaigns. Several of those shows have concerned path-breaking African-American athletes speaking out for social justice. A guy by the name of Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, and our own Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And last on our panel, but not least, Alan Rothenberg is a past president of the U.S. Soccer Federation. Like Irit in the production booth, Alan has been for the U.S. Soccer the person in the room where it all happens. He's really made it happen. So let me turn now to the panel and ask you a broad series of questions that you'll think about and answer individually. Please explain to the group the Jewish aspect of your engagement in sport. How did sports affect your Jewish identity? And how did your Jewish identity affect your career as a sports person? We'll go with Lenny, Alan, Irit, and Noah, sort of in that order. And if you need me to repeat the questions, Noah, I will.
And also cut me off if I speak
Yes.
too long.
I know he's a lacrosse player, so he might not remember all the things I just said.
Well, I think for me, obviously, I have a bit of a different background growing up in former Soviet Union in the late 70s, early 80s. Being Jewish is, again, something that, Larry, you mentioned, you hit in your experiences, but certainly in Soviet Union, we hit the fact that we were Jewish. I mean, it's something definitely didn't talk about in public. I was the only Jewish kid in my school, and although Odessa had a pretty large Jewish community, everything was really on a hush-hush. We didn't practice religion, didn't have a synagogue. There wasn't much about pride being Jewish at all. I mean, so it was definitely tough, and it was tough growing up in the environment where you had to be hiding your identity, your heritage. Especially in the environment when you're a young kid and you don't have anyone else that you can talk to. Obviously, I could talk to my parents at home, but outside of the house, there wasn't anyone else that I could talk about it. And certainly, when you're the only kid, you get a lot of friction with other kids that are fed the propaganda that they heard at home about Jews and how bad they were for the Soviet society, and when they looked at us as a lower class people, and certainly it was hard years, and obviously one of the main reasons why my parents wanted to immigrate to the United States. And as an athlete, as a kid growing up, and being part of fortunately being selected into a sports system, Soviet sports system. And for those of you guys that know or have followed sports in Eastern European countries, is a very intense sports system where you're basically selected out of different groups of kids and various sports, and you're picked because there is a potential that you could be really good. So I was picked at 9 years old out of thousands of kids into a special group of talented kids that potentially would one day represent Soviet Union on the world arena. And yet, when I went to competitions at 10, 11 years old, I won competitions, and they would give first place to someone else because, the last name Kreiselberg definitely stood out in Soviet Union. So, how do you explain to a 10, 11-year-old kid, when you obviously win a race that, you didn't win because you're Jewish? And that was the job that my father had to do, and explain to me the experience of what it means growing up and living in that country and being part of a minority, and the reason why he dreamt about having an opportunity to escape and come to America, and having a chance to be proud of who you are. And obviously for me, when we did come to America, and when I could go to a JCC and I can learn about Jewish culture, and when I had an opportunity to go to synagogue and eventually be proud to say that I'm Jewish and be proud of it, when my experiences going to the Olympic Games and being in Israel, it's an amazing journey for being so coming from one society where it's you're constantly people are against you constantly, to a society where I felt, at least for me personally here in America, that I could at least comfortably talk about it, and that was special for me.
Great. Thank you. Alan?
Wow. I'm completely humbled. I couldn't have had a more diametrically different background. I grew up in Detroit in a predominantly like 95% Jewish neighborhood. I never knew anything except Jews. I had to be introduced to somebody that they were not a Jew, a Gentile. I loved all sports and tried all sports and was terrible at all of them. But I did get introduced to Jews in sports very early, because in Detroit, when I was growing up, our star player was Hank Greenberg. He, 25 years before Sandy Koufax, of course, was the first dominant Jewish figure who refused to play in high holidays. And the story going around also was that in 1938, he was about to beat Babe Ruth's home run record, and toward the end of the season, they wouldn't pitch to him. They kept walking him intentionally, giving him lousy pitches, so he only ended up with 58 home runs. So I grew up with that, and in fact, when I would come home from school, I'd ask my father every day how'd the Tigers do, and if they won, he'd say, Hank Greenberg gewinnen. And that was years after Greenberg had been traded to Pittsburgh. And also, speaking of that and talking about what a quality person he was, there's a great story about Jackie Robinson in his first year in the major leagues, and he was getting abused by everybody, called every name. They were spiking him. They were doing anything they could. And he got to first base, and Greenberg was at first base. He just quietly tapped him in his tuchus with his first baseman's mitt, and he said, "You're doing a great job, kid. Keep it up." And Jackie Robinson said that was the only person in that whole year who said anything decent to him. So it was tremendous. Anyway, went to law school. Before I went to law school, of course, I went to college and joined a Jewish fraternity. So my Judaism was just in me from day one. It's interesting. Some of it's by hindsight, because I came here to practice law, joined a major law firm, and it's hard to believe today, but at that time I was either the second or third Jew at that law firm, biggest law firm in the city. And later on, when I was talking to classmates, not surprisingly, over half of the top law review top 10 students were Jewish, and I was the only one that got a job in a major law firm. And in fact, Georgina and I wanted to go to San Francisco. We couldn't get an interview at the top firms in San Francisco, so we said, okay, they'll have us here. So it's been just interesting, and it's so natural. For example, being involved with FIFA when I was running the '94 World Cup, we went back to that meeting of all these state-old Europeans, mostly Europeans, they're from all over the world, but all men, of course. And I don't know if any of them had ever seen a Jew. And I brought back our executive staff, and they consisted of 2 Jews, 2 women, and a Mormon. And I was just laughing quietly, the whole time. And I mean, Erin will get into what she's done for women on the women's soccer team, but I'm proud of the fact also that when I became president of the Soccer Federation, we funded the women's team so they could go to China and win the 1991 World Cup. And then we asked to host the 1999 World Cup, and FIFA said, well, okay, but in small stadiums in the Northeast. And we kept fighting with them, and then after the women went to Atlanta and won the gold medal in 1996 in front of full houses, enthusiastic houses, they finally said, okay, go ahead and do it anywhere you want. Of course, they didn't give us any more money. It was all at our risk. And that probably was the breakthrough major world's women's event, because we sold out the major stadiums all over the country. It was really spectacular. So I feel guilty after Lenny, but it's been a blessing, and my Jewish being has always been part of me, and also guides my views on everything almost without thinking about it. Quite honestly, it just comes naturally.
Great. Thank you very much. Noah, you remember?
I thought I was last there. But
No, well, we'll just go down.
all right, jog my memory on the original question. I feel like you're picking on me here, Larry.
The Jewish aspect, just explain to us the Jewish aspect of your engagement in sport. How does sport affect your Jewish identity, and how did your Jewish identity affect your career as a sports person?
So growing up in northern Vermont, in Burlington, Vermont, I thought I was the only Jew that existed, actually, until I went to Hebrew school. And then I said, there's 20 more of us, but nobody here likes to play sports. Everyone likes math. I don't like math. How do I fit in here? And I found my first calling as a secular student in Hebrew school playing basketball at recess with the Guatemalan custodian, and that was what drove me to get to Hebrew school every day. We joke about it, but outside of these main Jewish population centers, it can be a very isolating thing to be Jewish and to not understand what it means to connect to this cultural heritage or to have a meaningful outlet to develop that connection. I had been had a deep spiritual yearning for something, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it for many years, and I went to every avenue I could imagine to cultivate it, other religions, other sort of esoteric teachings, things that I could get my hands around. And the second I put an Israel lacrosse jersey on, similar to what Larry was discussing, it was like a switch was flipped. In the first night playing with Team Israel, I said, I can't believe there are more Jews out there that play lacrosse. I was literally shell-shocked by seeing a group of big, strong, athletic lacrosse players beating Team Germany, beating all of these folks that 70 years ago, these same gentlemen would be walking us to the camps. And it was really through sport that I developed a accessible way to find a Jewish identity, to move the spectrum from being secular to a little bit more religious, slowly but surely, to develop a meaningful interaction, a meaningful connection to Judaism in the Jewish narrative. So sport to me was really the first step in engaging this part of me that I always needed so badly but could never quite articulate because I never was exposed to it. And similar to what Lenny described, to be the only Jewish kid on a team or to be the only Jewish kid there is, it's hard to articulate that, especially being here in LA with such an amazing event with these amazing panelists in this beautiful building. So I think that sport is really the most accessible way to develop this connection to the Jewish narrative when you live on the peripheral of the Jewish community. So to me, sport was the beginning and just the first engagement vehicle. And I have my beautiful wife here, Laraz, in the front row, and she continued to move that needle for me. But really, it was sport that helped me develop and find the words to really explain what it is I was yearning for and what it was that was missing. Chazarti, what was missing from me. That's a little Herzum Hebrew over here before. So, in summary, I think for sport for me was the engagement vehicle, the way to develop this notion that was so foreign to me but so inherently there. That's why I think that this stuff has legs, the sports and Jews. So that's my pitch. You can cut me off there, Larry.
That's okay. I was gonna. Okay, Arit.
Well, for me, I grew up here in Los Angeles, and even though I was amongst a very dense population of Jews, none of them played sports. And really, where I was in the Northern Valley, and particularly Jewish girls did not play sports. So for all of my life, I've had two major parts of my identity, and one was being an athlete. So I grew up playing basketball. I was a shot put and discus thrower in high school, and then in college at Wisconsin, I rode crew. And that was a huge part of what I was and who I am. And then the other big part of my life was being part of the Jewish community, being involved in USY, which is the conservative youth movement, going to Jewish sleepaway camp every summer, Camp Ramah. And there really was never a time that my athletic identity and my Jewish identity really ever overlapped when I was growing up. Even when I was at Wisconsin, I was one of one Jews in the athletic program of maybe 2,000 athletes in all of Madison, and so I was oftentimes the first Jew that anybody would meet. And there were definitely, and I never faced anti-Semitism here in Los Angeles, but there was definitely some unfortunate, incidents at Wisconsin. This was in the mid-'90s that I didn't recognize as anti-Semitism, but other people had to point out to me. So, being an athlete was a huge part of who I was. Being Jewish was and obviously continues to be a huge part of who I am. And then moving into working in the sports industry, I started off working for the Oakland Raiders. Zero part of my Jewish identity had to do with that. And then I went into being a sports publicist, and I would say that in looking back at maybe if there was an inkling of my Jewish identity in my career, I would always kind of lean more towards the athletes that were doing, or I would lean more towards wanting to expose the athletes' work in the community, in their philanthropic work. And so, being Jewish and spending so much time in USY and Camp Ramah, that Tikkun Olam and social action was something that was just, part of everything that we did. It was as natural as the motzi. It was as natural as, celebrating Shabbat. And so it was not anything that was a surprise to me that that's kind of where I leaned more towards. And then as my iterations of my sports career kept on going, I moved more towards, I worked for a global nonprofit in sport, and that felt very giving back to the world. And, while I was there, ESPN did a documentary on the organization, and I felt like there wasn't enough attention around the movement of sport for development and peace. And so that's when I started to look further into and be encouraged to do more social action content. And now I find very much so that most of my Jewish identity dictates what I do in my vocation. And it might be what people might think of as a millennial mindset of being socially involved. But to me, it's a Jewish mindset of giving back and being a global citizen and figuring out, how can you not just help yourselves, but through what you do, give back to an entire community. And that is the fabric of being Jewish to me.
So that your last comment about giving back to the community sort of leads me to a question for you, Lenny. And I've known you now pretty well for 10 years and familiar with your swim camp. So I'm going to kind of head you in that direction for a minute. So you've now arrived here in America. You swim in America. You end up here at SC, very successful career. Years later, you decide you want to give back, as Arit is talking about, and you begin a swim camp or a swim school at the JCCA. So what role does your Jewish identity play today as a mentor to youth and owner of this extremely successful swim academy in Southern California, not only among Jewish athletes and young Jewish children who get to come to the JCCA, but the diversity that you reach out to and engage to come to the JCCA to learn to swim, to be water safe?
Well, obviously, having an opportunity, travel the world and success that I was able to achieve at the Olympics gave me the platform to connect closer to the Jewish community. And I really felt that and sensed that after, the success in Sydney Olympics and in 2000. And I didn't really realize it until after the games when constantly people would come across and talk to me and tell me what, how impactful my achievements were, especially with my background and being Jewish and, achieving such an incredible success. And then I had an opportunity to travel to Israel for the first time in 2001. And, that was probably one of the highlights of my life, to be there, having a chance to participate in the Maccabiah and having to see, 10,000 athletes. In 2001 it was a little less, it was about 5,000 athletes, but coming from all over the world to celebrate our heritage in our homeland. And for me to carry the United States flag into opening ceremony was a pretty special moment and a highlight of my life. And, obviously, one of the things that I understood is the impact that I can make, leading by example, and the impact that I can touch so many people, and especially so many young people. And I always I never took that for granted. I understood that I was in a position to make a difference and make an impact. And one of the things that I wanted to do after I retired from swimming is to continue to be in the sport and to be able to create a platform for myself that I can impact others in a positive way. And fortunate enough, I was able to open a swim academy at the Westside Jewish Community Center here in Los Angeles and start out at the swim academy there and really give an opportunity for kids to learn how to swim. And water safety is extremely important. It's one of the leading causes of accidental death that very few people talk about. And you can never be too young to learn how to swim. And once you know how to swim, you'll know how to swim for the rest of your life. So it's truly an activity that you can, and the important one, that you can make a lifelong impact. And I understood that. I understood also that I can make a difference, and was fortunate enough to start in 2005, and then now, we're 12 years later, we have locations around the country, and we've impacted tens of thousands of young kids. And Torah says that every father is supposed to teach their son how to swim. So it's ironic that I ended up, building something like this, and really to see kids walk through the doors and to see them persevere and persevere through roadblocks and challenges, and having the confidence to believe in themselves, I think is extremely powerful. And you can never be too young to have confidence in yourself. And I think you can only build that. And I'm really honored and privileged that I can be in a position that I can provide this for so many young kids around the country.
So Noah, we're going to feed off that with you, because I know part of the initiative in Israel, when we started Israel Lacrosse, was to introduce this sport to not only Jews in Israel, but Arabs who live in Israel, Ethiopians that live in Israel, and not just be individually focused at just Jewish athletes. And I know that there was a big movement to create a coexistence team between Jews and Arab youth in Israel. And I know that you were involved in that, and sort of takes from where Lenny was with what he's doing here, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
I've played in several world championships, several European championships, but the memory that I hold with me closest to my heart is watching the coexistence team comprised of Palestinian and Jewish players from Jaffa playing against another team for their first actual game, beating them. A 3-2 showdown of a score. However, seeing this team of players from a racially diverse, intense environment to go and beat another team in their first competitive game was really, for me, it was transformational, because as Lenny mentioned, it's great to be a part of the sport, but to lead others through that experiences that you had, to be able to engage, energize, educate youth through sharing your passion for whatever it is you love to do. It goes beyond these more conventional methods of community development and creating meaningful interaction. I have a master's degree in conflict studies, so I've seen that from my experience that a lot of these coexistence programming, it's a really great feel-good moment and everyone's feeling very empowered. And then when everybody goes home, it's a one-and-done ordeal and everyone feels good, yet there is no sustainable difference. There is no sustainable change in the community, in the inclusivity, in the culture that's created in those cities. So this program of these Arabs and these Jewish players from Jaffa, all these programs in Israel Lacrosse, it engages youth on the deepest peripheral of the country. As we all know, Israel faces some very complex challenges, from defense to economic challenges to a very complex and very interesting demographic challenges of how do you engage these people that come from such different backgrounds that end up in Israel, and how do you engage them to create these cultures of inclusivity, of engagement, of youth leadership, of civility. And I think that's really what the crux of this sport for good is. It's about creating engaged people, empowered people, people that yearn for inclusive communities and inclusive environments. You can see here, not to get too political, here in Charlottesville, man, I was just playing lacrosse at UVA, 10 years ago, and then there is a Jews will not replace us chant. We are seeing that there is a need for unconventional methods of creating community and creating inclusive environments for people. And sport breaks down those barriers, it breaks down these sort of political divides and enables us to go to a more primal place, right? You have a ball, you see one more person, what do? You pass the ball, you pass it forward. In Jaffa, we had a program, part of this coexistence programming, and I think the real heart and soul of the programming was a mentorship program where these high school players went and mentored elementary Arab and Jewish kids together and essentially did what I did for the high school program, for this youth program. And the way you see these changed, almost like these changed narratives of, oh, this is Muhammad that we always have these fights and I don't really know him, to he's on my midfield line and we always score goals. To me, the image that really burned in my head was seeing an Arab and a Jewish player walking down the street, lax sticks in one hand, falafel in the other. To me, it doesn't get any more profound than that. We can talk all about the achievements and what we've been able to do with sport, but it's really how we pass that on that is the real, that makes this such a profound topic. And I think that, as all of these awesome panelists have said, it's really about creating those engaged communities, teaching civility, giving people experiential education that enables them to be more engaged people in their lives. And I think that sport is it's great to get the kids that cannot sit still to do something that can help move the needle towards that engagement and inclusivity. So Larry, at the end of the day, I think that this sports stuff that we're talking about is really experiential education. It's about getting kids to notice the connections that exist among us, about what we can achieve together when inclusivity and empowerment and engagement is what drives us rather than points on a scoreboard or anything else that follows this sport. So really, in summary, back to these youth programs, it's amazing to have participated with the Israeli national team. It's amazing to debut at the World Championships. But what truly starts shifting the world into a different place is when you create these engaged youth communities where they develop a notion of what it means to be a citizen, to be engaged and to be energized by this stuff. So that's why I think we're really here, is to talk about that engagement.
Absolutely. So Alan, I'm going to follow those two great comments. At least I didn't let you follow Lenny this time.
Thank you for that.
No problem. But, with all your accomplishments in the world of soccer and all the things that you were able to do to promote men's and women's soccer here in the United States and fill the Rose Bowl and do all those wonderful things, how do you see increasing trends in Jewish athletic interest in soccer in the United States? And what makes soccer a sport worth encouraging American youth, Jewish youth, to play?
Well, I'll answer that question, but I just want to pick up on the one thing that no one mentioned about Charlottesville and the importance of sport in society, and this cuts across Jews. It's all sports and all society. When you look at the history, you go into Harry Truman integrated the armed forces in the early 40s. It didn't get the biggest amount of publicity. It just happened, it was announced, and that was it. One baseball player comes in 4 years later, and that changed everything as far as everybody's view on African Americans' rights. You mentioned Ali before. There was a lot of activity about the Vietnamese War, and probably when he first refused to go and serve, he got a ton of criticism, but over time, he became heroic as a person who would stand for something that he believes in. And obviously, nothing could be more dramatic than what's happening this weekend. Again, the horrible views with respect to how we treat African Americans have been there for a long time. Black Lives Matter was an outbreak of Ferguson. That was, what, 3 years ago? And it was pretty controversial, mostly because, are they protesters, are they violent, or what? One football player taking a knee, and by the way, when he did it, he didn't tell anybody, he did no fuss about it, but somebody took a picture of that, and it is spread. And as horrible as some of us might think it was that the President of the United States said what he said on top of everything else that he said or done, if he did that in another environment, I don't know that it would have mattered. But boy, now you're taking on football, my God, and it's just delightful to see the reaction of the players, the teams, the owners, the commissioners. Some of them may be motivated, the commissioners and the owners, strictly for financial reasons, but nonetheless, they're standing up or kneeling down. The only shame is it didn't happen during the NBA season, because 100% of the players would have taken a knee if it was the NBA season. And even there, remember, our Donald here, Donald Sterling, had similar backgrounds to Donald Trump in the real estate business. It didn't seem to matter. Suddenly, when it happened with respect to his basketball team, boom, that fast everybody reacted, and it only happened because of the prominence of sports. You mentioned before the article on the breaking the stereotype of Jews, and everybody up here has broken it except me, because they were athletes. I am the stereotype. But you look at the lawyers and the owners and the commissioners, the people on that side of the operation, disproportionately Jewish. I mean, the commissioner of basketball, Adam Silver's Jewish, succeeding David Stern. The commissioner of hockey is Gary Bettman. The commissioner of Major League Soccer is Don Garber. And until last year, when he retired, the commissioner of baseball was Bud Selig. So 4 of the 5 major sports had commissioners who were Jewish. Owners, just go up and down the line of ownership in sports. And so many of them are leaders also in their respective communities, especially in the Jewish community. And it's had a major impact. But I guess I'm jealous of all of you who broke the stereotype, but I'm proud of being part of the stereotype. Now, what was your original question?
So my original question was, that's okay. What makes, do you see an increasing trend in Jewish athletic interest in soccer? And what makes soccer a sport worth encouraging American youth to play, American Jewish youth to play?
Soccer is a great fit for the stereotype, because the fact of the matter is it's not as physical a sport as others. American youth have used soccer as an entree point, among other things, to get to college, especially women, because Title IX created opportunities. And again, the beauty of it is it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. And it also doesn't matter in that sport what country you're from. I mean, when you look around again at the major professional teams, they're the United Nations, and even now Major League Soccer. All the top players are from elsewhere in the world. And so if part of the goal is to understand diversity and accept diversity, it's there. So there's nothing to bar Jews from being involved with soccer. On the other hand, frankly, there's nothing that says, a Jew should do that. All young people should do that. It's a great, healthy sport. And if you get good at it, there's now in this country opportunities that didn't exist before. And as I said, it really is a great entree for kids to get scholarships to college.
Thank you. So, Arid, I have a question for you. You talked a little bit about your experience at the University of Wisconsin. I'm glad that Noah's sitting between the two of you. Might have a Big Ten fight there.
Well, at least he's not from Ohio State. So.
Yeah, there we go. Still red. So, during your time, high school, college, post-college. Have you ever really directly experienced anti-Semitism during your athletic career? And if so, how did you respond, and was your Jewish identity strengthened or challenged by that experience?
Well, I did experience anti-Semitism, and I didn't know I was experiencing it. I think because growing up again here in Los Angeles, I'd never faced it, even though when I was an athlete, I was the only Jew on my team. And so I just didn't know what I was seeing. And it was a very unfortunate situation where I was kind of one of the strongest women on the crew team, and also one of the top women rowers, and I would never make the first boat, and I would never make the second boat. And I would sit with the coach, and she would tell me I just didn't have the type of skills that I needed to make the first or second boat, and I wasn't included in winter training camp. I wasn't then included in spring camp, and she even, when I came to her during Yom Kippur and said I would not be attending practice, she said, "Why?" And I said, "It's a holiday for me." And she said, "You can go to services in the morning and still come to practice at night." And I just didn't know what I was seeing or what was going on, because I'd never experienced any of it here in LA. So it took a handful of my non-Jewish teammates to eventually pull me to the side. And this wasn't until the spring, and there were 200 of us who went out for crew, and 60 of us made it. And by the spring, there were 48 of us who were left over. Crew is quite a difficult sport. And I still, by the spring sprint season, I still wasn't in the top boats, and I was still, posting all of the top numbers, and was still the strongest on, and the strongest on the team. And my teammates pulled me to the side and said, "She's not putting you in the boat because you're Jewish. She's not putting you in that first boat." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "She makes all of these anti-Semitic remarks about you, and just in general about Jews when you're not there. And she calls you, a spoiled Jewish brat from Los Angeles." And I just didn't know what I was seeing. And it turned out that I thought, well, maybe this isn't that big of a deal. And I happened to be at a Passover dinner with some friends who were in Madison who were Jewish and who were lawyers, and I happened to say something to them, and they said, "This is a very, very big deal. This has to be reported to the ADL." And, of course I said, "What's that?" And so then she was investigated, and she was found to be guilty of anti-Semitism, and she was put on probation by the university. And the varsity, by that time, it was maybe May or June, and the varsity coach, said, "We never knew this was going on, and we talked to all of the other coaches, and you are one of the top athletes, and we want you as part of this program." And by that time, I wouldn't say my Jewish identity was strengthened or weakened.
Right.
I think that my willingness to continue as an athlete, and I think most of it was because I realized I wasn't going to make a career out of being a rower.
Right.
And I think then it just was one of those things where I just sort of passed through it. Right. And then it just so happened I wanted to be very involved in the sports industry, and I wasn't as involved with the Jewish community for another maybe decade. But I don't think that experience affected my Jewish identity at all. It was very unfortunate, but I think it was, it was the opposite of, I think, what Lenny experienced, where he was used to seeing anti-Semitism everywhere.
Right.
And I had never seen it, so.
I want to follow that a little bit, Noah, and ask you the same question instead of going to a different question. And the only reason is I think that's such a focused topic of what we're discussing tonight. So, Burlington, University of Vermont, experiences that you might be able to share.
I think, back to sort of what I talked about in my first comment, I didn't even know any other Jews were out there. I thought I was kind of the only Jewish kid. And I thought, I guess that's just what, it's what it is. everyone goes to Christmas, and I go to, have Chinese food. That's just what it is. So I never really faced any anti-Semitism because I didn't know, kind of like I was clueless to an extent. But however, I started to notice a trend that I was always the only Jewish kid at every single thing I did. I go, there's got to be a few other Jewish kids out there, somewhere. And when I got to college, still no Jewish kids, still didn't really know what was up. Maybe I just chose the wrong schools always. But then when I got involved with Israel Lacrosse, it was the first time I'd ever experienced any very direct anti-Semitism. We were playing in the 2012 European Championships, and we had just, as true gentlemen, really gave Germany, sent them home sad, Team Germany. And we came back to our locker room, and there was a swastika carved into the wall. I knew what that was I knew what that was.
And Noah, tell everybody where those games were in 2012.
Those games were in Amsterdam during that time. We went to the Anne Frank House, and we started to notice that there was a lot of anger towards our team. We were winning a lot of games. We were very skilled. I like to think we were very graceful about it. Yet we encountered a lot of very indirect anti-Semitism through being sent to the farthest possible field away from everything always, to having these swastikas carved. And then rather than in us retaliating verbally, we just had to continue to win. We just had to continue to, right, exactly. We let our play speak for us, and we showed that we weren't going to play along with this sort of indirect anti-Semitism, and it was our opportunity there to not only stand up for Team Israel, but also for other minority nations. At the World Lacrosse Championships in 2014, I was actually asked to write an article about my experience because it was during the 2014 Gaza War. It was during Suketan. If you guys are familiar with the war that happened in the summer of 2014, we were playing in the World Championships during 2014 with all of our youth players streaming these games from bomb shelters as rockets are raining on Gaza, as our Palestinian and Jewish coexistence teams continued to play together among the war. And we had other folks from other teams saying, "We hope your houses don't get hit with bombs," in a derogatory way, not in a concerned way. And it was the first time that we really realized what we were playing for was much bigger than a medal. It was much bigger than even our own Jewish pride or playing for the state of Israel. We were playing for these youth players that faced unsurmountable adversity every single day just to get to practice to play. And we had these kids that were going during a war to get together with their Arab teammates to continue practicing, to continue playing, to continue to build this movement that we had instilled among all of these youth in these peripheral communities. So I think, to get back to the question, anti-Semitism, I think that we saw there are people historically always looking for someone to blame, for a scapegoat, for someone to point fingers to. And for us, it was really about representing an Israel that is diverse, that is inclusive, that is real, that is not what is portrayed on TV, that is not portrayed in the news by propaganda. And that is why this sports stuff has legs, guys, because it is such a powerful way to send a message about what we represent and who we are as a people. And we've talked about that notion of tikkun olam, of healing a broken world. The very powerful thing about sport development is it gives kids on the peripheral, people on the peripheral of the Jewish narrative to be engaged in active tikkun olam, to be an active player in building a world that is free of hatred and divisions. So essentially, yes, we faced that anti-Semitism, but for us, it really fueled the bigger picture, the bigger movement, which was to create inclusive, accountable, empowered kids in a country that faces unique, unsurmountable odds. And this sport is just one more vehicle to keep hope, to continue to engage, and continue to build a more modern, just Israel. So that's...
One thing, because I was with you guys in Denver, and when he was talking about the issues with playing during the war, we were in Denver playing. We lost a couple players who had to go back to Israel. 2 players, in fact, that I remember, who went home because their families were in shelters and they were, concerned about it. So they just picked up and packed and left. That was not great for the team, but the team rallied around that. But I also remember on that Sunday after one of the games, we all went and watched Turkey play. And there was the team from Turkey, all Muslims, and the team from Israel, all Jews. And the camaraderie and the support and the relationship there was separated by sport, was eliminated by a lacrosse ball and a lacrosse stick. So the opportunity to have sport as the commonality here and what we're talking about today is so powerful and so strong. And what everybody here, all of us, have experienced as athletes, wherever we are, whether in the United States or overseas or wherever it is, that sport does cut the divide and does allow us to be just boys or just girls and not a Jew and a Muslim or an African American and a white guy. We're able to play sport together and step on the field. Once we, as I say to the boys that I coach here, once you get inside the line, you're all the same. Doesn't matter anymore.
Larry, you want to take a question?
Yeah, so I wanted to thank this wonderful panel. And we probably could go on for hours and hours, but I just wanted to see if we had a couple of questions out here. If you would just stand and address whoever you'd like the question addressed to, and then go ahead.
We should have a microphone.
We're getting one. We got a runner. Just pass it. It's a sports night. No, like this. They do that at SC. They throw a lot of interceptions here, but.
Oh, hey.
But they still win.
My question is for Ms. Yellen. You said you were the strongest athlete on the crew team. How's that defined? Is it, don't forgive me if I'm sounding stupid, but a weight
Sure.
thing, or how do you know that you're the strongest? Just the most skilled, maybe?
I mean, when you're the first athlete to break an oar in the middle of a practice.
Okay, yeah. That works.
No,
yeah.
I was. It's by squats, and I mean it's your regular sort of in the weight room kind of tests. My dad, who's sitting behind you, had me weightlifting since I was a young kid. On the ergs also. I mean, I was, yes, you're right, Reeve, thank you, that I would pull some of the lowest times. So I was a lousy runner, though, a terrible runner, but very strong. Unnecessary strength.
Another question? This gentleman right here.
I guess this question would be kind of for you, Larry, and Noah, and Lenny. Having the ties to Israel and competing in sport, it seems like, and this kind of concerns more the Olympics, though, but you touched on it a little bit, Noah, the assimilated team with the Arab Israelis and the Israeli Jewish competitors. So it seems like every Summer Olympics, you have a story. I think last time it was judo, wrestling, sometimes in swimming, where an Israeli competitor, swimmer, judoka, wrestler, will be competing, and then you'll get an athlete from a country who has some sort of political scruples just forfeit or not even want to compete. Now, how does that make you feel as people who have ties to Israel or have competed for Israel, and is there any kind of solution to ending that practice?
Lenny?
Well, again, I think from a personal standpoint, I've never encountered that. Obviously, it's following it has been extremely disappointing to see that even in the Olympic Games, at the biggest stage in the world, that people are still wanting to make a political statement, especially considering the tragedy of 72, what happened then, and especially considering that for so many years Israel has tried to ask IOC to acknowledge or have a moment of silence during the opening ceremony to acknowledge the athletes that were lost. So it's definitely has been tough to see that it continues to be out there. But I think the way to solve this is that's where the camaraderie, that's where sports brings people together. And I think it's important that others step up and talk about it and support athletes and support Israel and support Israeli athletes at moments like this. Because I will tell you, being at 2 Olympic Games and living in the Olympic Village, and walking into a cafeteria that fits 10,000 people, just even in Sydney, I think at that time there were 35 different world conflicts going on at the time of the Olympic Games. But yet, when you're in the village, you don't feel it. I mean, that's what sports brings everyone together. You sit in you walk into that huge cafeteria, and it's everyone there interacting, and and there's that camaraderie as being together part of this incredible event. So when we have moments like this, when we have athletes that are boycotting, competing against Israeli athletes, I think it's a matter of other athletes from other countries to step up and support and understand and remind everyone where we are and what we're part of, a part of something really great, big, that brings nations, peoples together.
To me personally, I think it's the other athlete's problem, not the Israeli athlete's problem. If that person's there to compete, they've probably spent their entire life to compete. And like I said before, when you get inside the white line or inside the circle, it's just a sport. And everything else should be, a different place in life. Young lady?
Thank you. I'd like to turn our attention to Title IX. We've talked a lot about issues and male athletes. When I was in elementary school, I loved gymnastics. I was very good. And when I got to high school, I went right into the gym, went to the coach and said, I'm really interested in gymnastics. What do I do? And he laughed in my face. There was no gymnastics for girls, or anything but water ballet. We had that was it. I know it's very different now, thankfully. But do we have any holdovers? I mean, does Title IX do enough? What do you think is the situation now?
I think in college sports, it's gone very well for women. I think that from where I have stood, that you do have so many strong female programs really across this country, and we're very lucky in this country, I think, to have something like Title IX at the collegiate level. I think when you're talking about professional women's sports, it is a very, very sad, still frustrating type of environment. And he's being incredibly humble, but Mr. Rothenberg really is a gigantic reason that the Women's World Cup looks the way that it looks today. He is one of the people who brought that together for women's soccer in the mid-90s and made the modern day Women's World Cup look the way that it looks. With all of that said, there's just a gigantic gap in gender equality issues for women's professional sports, not just in soccer, but in basketball. You look at the scrutiny that Serena Williams faces, constantly as a tennis player. And so I think that there's a long, long way to go. I think that really, something that we need to all the people or the entities that we need to hold responsible are really the media and the proper attention that the media needs to bring to a lot of these kind of issues. Because the more pressure that media puts on FIFA, or I don't think there's many issues at the IOC level, but soccer really is the global sport, and if soccer sets the tone, then I think a lot of other sports will follow in that gender equality path. But FIFA, even with all of what they went through a couple of years ago, and putting out a show for what they wanted to do with women's soccer, as far as I've seen, they really haven't done much. So, and it's the media's fault as well. And so that's where the disparity is. I think in college sports, there are so many great opportunities for female athletes, and below that.
Alan, you have a follow-up on that?
I don't want to get in a debate with Eric.
You're smart not to.
I'll just accept your comments about me. That'll be good. In answer to your question, and I agree totally with Eric that in college it's really pretty successful, and I think that's also led to, by example, the schools that aren't covered by Title IX, the K through 12, because they have examples, they have role models, and the attitude in the sports world toward women has changed completely, and including within women. I'm older than all these guys. In my day, women were supposed to have muscles. They weren't supposed to sweat. That's all by the wayside, which is all great. Obviously, there's a lot of ground to make up, but I think that it's all moving in the right direction. The only comment I'll make in response to Eric is we have to remember that professional sports is a business. And so the bottom line is what matters. I'll take issue with you on Serena. She may have been criticized, but man, she's clearly the best, and she gets great financial opportunities, great commercials, because she is the best. Individual sports for women has been pretty good in terms of its success. It's the team sports, as you mentioned, basketball and soccer being the tops of those. And they've made a lot of progress, but there is still a long ways to go. And the end of the day, it's about the finances. I don't think it's about people's attitude. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yes, it's people's attitudes too. But the bottom line, they'll swallow their attitude if there's enough money involved.
Another question right here.
I have a two-part thing. One goes to what you said earlier. I'm a long-distance runner. I run the LA Marathon. I've done it 15 times. And you get a wide cross-section of people from the city who show up on that one day.
Right.
Then after the marathon is over, everybody goes back to their provinces within the city. So that's one statement. The other is, how do you reconcile the conflict between people with Jews growing up with an emphasis on getting an education versus participating in sports? Private high schools or Ivy League schools have an emphasis on academic achievement, and you may not get as many Jewish athletes participating in sports. Like in professional sports, baseball, basketball, and football, there aren't a lot of Jews. So I don't know how you
The
get...
owners are Jewish, though.
Yeah.
So that,
right.
you go to the Ivy League school.
They got educated.
Yeah. So I don't know how you increase Jewish participation.
I think, from my, I'll answer the question and then let the panel answer it. I think has a lot to do with what you want to focus on in your life. You have to just be, as a Jewish athlete or a non-Jewish athlete, it's all about focus and dedication. And if you want it, you have to figure out what you want. And if you want to be a doctor and an athlete, then you have to do both. If you want to just be a doctor, then you're just going to be a doctor. But if you go to Ivy League schools or some of the top universities in the country, there are a lot of Jewish athletes playing and competing. Yeah, they're not on the football field most likely. there used to be a lot on the basketball court, especially at the University of North Carolina in 1956, I think it was, or 55. When they won the national championship, the whole team was Jewish. They brought them all down on the train and locked them out, in a building and then let them play basketball. But there's a lot of great Jewish athletes out there, but it's like anything else. If you want to, whatever you want to be, you just have to set the goal and be there. And just, compete and be ready to compete. I mean, this guy is a Jewish athlete, won 4 gold medals. So it's possible, and now a successful businessman. So there's a lot of things that you can do. You just have to, sport brings a lot of good things to life. And as we all know, you ran a marathon. You have to set your time, manage your time, have your focus, have a plan, and execute. That's what it's all about.
I agree with you, Larry. I still think within the Jewish community, there is still that stereotype that Jews cannot achieve high level of success in sports. But I think that's the stereotype that we need to break. And maybe that's the stereotype that needs to be broken by Jewish athletes that have achieved great success on a world stage. Because ultimately, sports and being able to achieve success in sports requires so many personal attributes that you can apply in everything else in life that will help you to be a doctor or an attorney or whatever career path you choose. So, and I don't think that is talked much about. I think it's overlooked. The characteristics you build through sport. And I think it's a responsibility of those of us that have achieved success to talk about that. And, for me personally, when I talk to youth and I travel around the world, U.S., and talk about to young kids, I talk about that anything is possible. It's up to you. There is no stereotype. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. If you're willing to dream and you're willing to work hard and believe in yourself, you can do both. You can be a great athlete and you can achieve, have great education. And to me, I think that's the bottom line.
One more question. Yes, sir.
With respect to drugs and doping, do you feel that every country is on equal playing field? And also, what do you think needs to be done?
Ask Lenny's
What do you think needs to be done to put everyone on the same playing field? And also, with respect to the athletes, do you think more needs to be done in the social media so that we can see the negative effects? Certainly it makes us strong, might make them stronger and everything, but the really downside of what drugs can do, so that it's more like a preventive measure for those that are, are waffling about whether or not to take drugs to make them better athletes.
So I'm going to touch upon that more in a youth development concept rather than in a professional capacity. The World Doping Agency has pretty clear guidelines. I believe they do the Olympics, the World Doping.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So they do NCAA, the World Lacrosse Championships. When you're looking at drug abuse and all of these downward spirals that come from these risky behaviors, it's the folks that are the most isolated in communities, the most on the peripheral, that are most susceptible to these risky behaviors of drug abuse, violence, and perhaps even worse, apathy. So really, beyond being a player, I think the next, once you move from being a player to being a figurehead or a coach or doing this sort of social justice work, it's really about creating engagement and enabling these youth to have a personal vision about how they're going to live their lives. And the sports is just another experiential tool about how to learn to live, how to be a civilian. Lacrosse to me had impacted me in every capacity. It really brought me to Judaism. It brought me to Israel. It brought me to my wife. It brought me, I'll tell you what, serving in the IDF, I was never more prepared going into the Army than being a former Division I lacrosse player. And man, did I never forget any equipment after all that lacrosse equipment. And that's rule number 1, remember your gear. And so I really think that the role for folks of us at this panel that have moved beyond our individual athletic careers is to be that voice that has the bigger picture, that we do everything with a methodical, deliberate approach, and that sport is just the means. It is not the ends. The ends are engaged individuals, stronger, more inclusive communities, and a more resilient group of people that are able to face adversity because they have faced adversity at low stakes on a playing field or in the swimming pool. And I think that that is really the big picture here, is creating civil, engaged folks that are able to face adversity and know what the bigger picture is, know what the bigger meaning is behind the scoreboard. So that's, I think, the next step in this conversation. So we'll see you next week for the next panel discussion.
I'd also say, though, on the drug issue, separate out sports and general usage. By and large, if you're a competitive athlete, your body is so important to you and you take care of it. And in fact, very few competitive athletes want to take drugs. You read all about the performance-enhancing drugs, and they're there, and there's no denying it. And in answer to your question, clearly there are some countries who violate that with impunity. But WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association, has done a great job, and it covers a lot of things. So, yes, you'll read about the occasional star athlete who's used performance-enhancing drugs. But by and large, if you want to keep people away from drugs, have them be athletes.
And it's also a really complicated issue. I had a client who, at the time, was the most well-known NFL player to test positive for steroids in 2006. And when you talk about, there's definitely a difference between international sports under WADA and USADA, and then versus team and league sports here, especially in the United States, who are under whatever is collectively bargained between their unions and their leagues. And it's a very, very complicated kind of topic that we probably could spend another 90 minutes talking about. But there are a lot of things that go on with professional athlete drug positive testing that is incredibly unfair. That you and I could be taking supplements because it's an industry that's not mandated by the FDA, and we could be ingesting things that we don't know are not on the ingredient list, and the athletes are not held to that same standard. They're supposed to be responsible for what they put in their body no matter what. So again, it's a very complicated issue. I'll probably let Lenny end with it with your original question, but I can't figure out how that relates exactly to Judaism and sports, but I'm sure we could figure something out. But it's very, very complicated.
I just want to add one thing. In the question you asked about Jews wanting to go to Ivy League schools and the pressure, and sports takes time, studying takes time. First of all, as a Jew who went to an Ivy League school out of a working class neighborhood, and being the first one in my family to go to college, sports helped get me in to an Ivy League school. But more important, once I got there, and I think everyone here, and I wasn't quite at the level of you guys. I was good for Ivy League, but that's it. But what it did do is I mastered my body. And mastering your body as a runner or as any athlete gives you a sense of self-confidence. I would not be a professor here. I'm in my 39th year here. I would not have done it, because I remember my sophomore year, I took a graduate course at Columbia and was talking to somebody who was preparing for his qualifying exam, and he showed me a 25-page reading list. I thought, oh man, I can never do that. But by my senior year, I thought, if I can master my body and I can run all these 4 events a meet, I can master a reading list. I can master any challenge that I set any reasonable challenge that I set my mind to. And the other thing, competing as a Jew, and particularly I was at Oxford running for Oxford against Cambridge, and then I also played rugby, which I'd never played before. I played squash, which I'd never played before. It also broke down for kids who had not really met Jews. It broke the stereotype of a Jew who is actually good at sports and could give as much as he got, particularly in playing rugby and some of the rougher games. But I want to thank our panelists tonight. I also want to thank the Jewish Community Foundation and USC Athletics that helped underwrite our event this evening. And finally, if this does interest you, beyond this is what we have out. This is our volume, Beyond Stereotypes. And it really is an interesting story, or stories to read about. Thank you. I hope we will see you at our next event. And if you're not on our mailing list, please sign up outside. Happy New Year.